What is radiant presence? What is reality? What is this that is here? What are you? These are profound questions. These are the questions that yoga addresses. These are questions that the investigation of yoga reveals the answers to. Radiant presence, what reality actually is very difficult to understand from the point of view of a consensus reality approach, the sort of mindset that we've all been steeped in terms of our worldly education. The nature of what it is very peculiar from that point of view. It includes, its very nature is completely beyond anything that can be conceived of. It is literally inconceivable. It is both many and one at the same time. It's different than itself and the same as itself at the same time. It's both subject and object at the same time. It's both everything and nothing at the same time. Now, plainly, these ideas are gibberish in terms of plain logic, in terms of common sense thought, and yet that's the nature of what this actually is. So, there's one thing present. This one thing is reality. This one thing is you. This one thing is your experience. From your point of view, your experiential field is what reality looks like, is what reality consists of. What you call your experiential field, if you look at it closely, includes everything. You know your body exists because it appears in your experience. You know the world exists because it appears in your experience. You know other humans exist because they appear in your experience. You know anything you know whatsoever, history exists because it appears in your experience. Science exists because it appears in your experience. Physics exists because it appears in your experience. Everything and anything whatsoever that you think of as actual is actually your experience. Now, this is plain to see, and we're all very familiar with it. But we don't usually draw the conclusions that therefore experience is what everything is. We simply assume that experience is some vague description of a property of experiencing things that actually exist, whereas the experience itself is nothing. It's just some transparency that enables all of these actualities to appear. And in a profound sense, that's true, but this transparency, this property that enables them to appear, is also what they consist of. The situation is very much like the situation of a dream that we're all familiar with, where when you're lost in a dream, you seem to be in a world, you seem to perhaps be in a body in a complex situation. There can be all sorts of elaboration, very precise, very manifest, very seemingly objective detail. And yet, when you wake up, you realize it was nothing but dream. The only thing that was present there at all was dreaming. There were no objects. There were no other people. You didn't even have a body. All of these things appear very convincingly, perhaps, because of the potency of dreaming, the power of dreaming itself to be able to enact this. But when you're lost in the dreaming is invisible. You're not aware of it. It's a property that it's an actuality, the only actuality that's present there, and you're completely unaware of it being present. You're only noticing the things around you, the situations you're in, the things you're caught up in that seem to matter to you, and so on. Now, of course, this is exactly what happens here in the waking world. Here I am sitting in a room, I'm talking to a computer, I see your faces on the computer screen, all of these various things, and all of that actually exists. All of that is real. But all of that is real is actually my experience. The only thing whatsoever that I can experience is my experience. And all of the complexities and subtleties that seem to appear are aspects of the way that this actuality that is my experience is capable of appearing. So, what is experience? What is this that is here? What is this that is present? Experience is radiant presence. Radiant presence is experience. Once you have the idea that experience itself is a thing and is in fact the only thing, then you are empowered to be able to approach this as it actually is, in the only way that will enable you to discover what it actually is. So, we're all very familiar with the way that our consciousness effortlessly analyzes and determines what is being experienced. Can you all please try to keep your microphones muted if you're not speaking? Thanks very much. We're all familiar with the effortless way that intelligence analyzes experience. It takes no thought at all for me to look around the room and recognize, every object in it. I can define it. I can say, oh, that's a table, that's a rug, this is a computer, this is a window, so on and so forth. And ordinarily, this is what all the attention is given to in the course of experience, is these interpretations, which form a gestalt of an interpretive framework of the whole of which is the world that you seem to be in. So I can say, I seem to be in a world where there is a room and I'm in the room, and the room is in a town and there's a window and I can look through the window and there's all these various objects outside and I can name them all. And I can do a very elaborate description of this scenario, this world I seem to be in, and describe my body and the seeming internal states of my body, the seeming states of my mind and thoughts and my mood, and just a very elaborated description of everything that seems to be happening. And this whole thing would be, this world would be an interpretive framework. It's a framework made up of interpretations that seems to be the whole, the gestalt that seems to be what my reality is from the point of view of that interpretive framework. And this is the normal human mode of approaching experience. In yoga, we try to penetrate this mode. We try to see beyond the interpretation, see that the interpretations are occurring spontaneously within experience, but experience itself is not actually made up of entities and things that the interpretation is defined to be. Experience itself is very different than these interpreted concepts and objects. The way interpretation works depends upon being able to define, being able to pin down what things are. A thing is a thing only to the extent it is definable as being that. So there's a table over here. The table's a table only to the extent it stays being a table. If it's a stable, fixed entity that does not change, that is not mutate, that is not flexible, and so on. Whereas experience itself is actually undefinable. Experience itself is actually very, very fluid. If you look at your experience in the moment, you'll notice it's continually shifting. I shift my head and everything moves. I move my head a little bit this way and my computer gets bigger. I back up a little and the computer gets smaller. So this computer is not a fixed thing. It's a thing that gets bigger, it gets smaller, it gets lighter, it gets darker. I close my eyes, it disappears altogether. I go to sleep and the entire world disappears. So there's, in experience itself, there are no stable things. There are no definable, findable objects in a simple sense. But to the defining property of mind, to the interpreting property of mind, that's not seen, that's not recognized. The defining mind pins down stable, definable, findable objects that are not fluid, that are not up for grabs, that are not open to question as to what's being present, what's being experienced. Whereas in the actuality of experience, there's a fluidity, there's a dynamism, there's a richness. I look at a surface, and the surface seems to be a color, but it's pulsating, it's scintillating, it's almost breathing. There's a dynamism and aliveness there that is very plain to see. And yet the interpreting consciousness ignores this. The interpreting consciousness says, no, it's a single color, and the color is what it is, and it's stable, and it doesn't change. So experience itself is intrinsically undefinable. And interpretations depend upon definition. They depend upon being able to say, this is this and that's that, and being able to draw a distinction between them. Whereas experience is a fluidity. Everything blends together into a whole. It's a whole that is infinitely differentiated and yet is seamlessly itself. Another interesting aspect of radiance is this property of being infinitely differentiated and yet never becoming anything in itself. If I look at my visual field, there's an infinity of information. Every place I look is a different color, a different brightness, a different quality. No matter how finely I look, I just find more and more and more detail. And yet, it's whole. The only thing that's present is the field itself, the field of vision. So it's one thing that's infinitely differentiated. And this differentiation is also absolutely dynamic. What I see in one moment changes to the next moment. My field of vision may shift. I may move my head a little bit, the light changes. All of, the constant dynamism. If I look at anything for very long, I discover this dynamism. This is in the field of vision. Of course, this applies as well to all the other aspects of experience. Radiant presence is reality. Radiant presence is this immediate actuality, which is right here, right now. Comprehensive. It's what it is. Now, ordinarily, the presence of your reality may seem to be very complex. It may seem to be you, it may seem to be your world, it may seem to be your body, it may seem to be your personality, it may seem to be other people, it may seem to be other things, it may seem to have all of this enormous complexity of conditions and things that seem to be separate from each other. In actual fact, there's only one thing present. This is radiant present. This reality that is here is this one thing that is. Its nature is peculiar because it seems to be all of these different things. It seems to be so complex and have so many different implications and different situations that are implied and problems that are implied and all of this complexity. But in actual fact, that is only the way it seems to be due to the way it's being interpreted to be by intelligence. In fact, it is one thing, it is one system, it is one being, and this being is you. This being is God. This being is the Atman. This being is reality. And it is nothing other than this that is right here, right now. So yoga is the process of being with this, of exploring this, discovering that it is not this complexity that we think of it as being. It is not this partialization, and you are not this limited being that you are maybe used to thinking of yourself as being. But through exploring this present actuality of your experience right here, right now, you discover this one condition that is this, the radiant presence, that is what is present, that is what this is, that is what you are. And as you discover this, the implications of what's occurring, the implications of what you are, changes drastically. We're all familiar with the normal human worldview, where you're a limited person in a vast environment, and you're in a more or less precarious position, and you have to struggle to survive and to succeed and to be happy and to be sure you have what you need. We find ourselves presently in a seemingly precarious social situation, and people discuss remarks about what's going to happen, what's going on. All this can be seemingly very unsettling because the implication of it is challenging. The implication of it is difficult. It presents possible problems. But the implication of radiant presence is one of eternal fullness, richness, completeness, meaningfulness, profundity, beyond space and time. And this is, in fact, the actuality that is here, that you are. And as you come to discover this through yoga, then you have to appreciate and enjoy the lusciousness of this implication, by contrast with the paltriness of our normal personal identifications and consensus reality orientation. And it's quite nice because you actually get your cake and eat it too, because you don't lose your human personality, you don't lose your human life, you don't lose the human identifications, but you discover that these are partialized modes within this transcendental completeness that is actually present. And all of these partialized modes are fully ways in which it expresses itself. So feel your being. You are. This is right here, right now. Feel this. Notice it. Notice that you are feeling it. Notice that you can't not feel it. You know this is. You know you are. Feel this knowing. Feel its richness. Feel its certainty. That this is undeniable. It's self-verifying. It doesn't depend upon being believed in. It doesn't depend upon, having ideas about it. This is a certainty. And notice that this is true. Notice that you know this, that you feel this, that you are this. And let the implication of what does it feel like? What does being feel like? What does your presence feel like? It's comprehensive. It's everything. It supports everything. Being supports you. Being supports your world. Being supports itself. And yet it itself is supported by nothing. Being seems like such a simple thing. We take it for granted. We know we are, but we don't bother to attend to it very much. It seems boring, it seems uninteresting, it's a given. But in fact, it's the other way around. Being is the most important thing. Being is the fullness, the richness. Being is what everything is and where everything comes from. It's what you are. It's what your intelligence is. It's what your power is. It's what your functionality is. It's just simply this being that is here. The way that that's so is known directly, simply through feeling it, through exploring it. It will show you what it is. It will show you how it is what it is. Radiant presence is a very strange condition. It's not unlike anything that we are used to thinking of. It is one thing, it is completely and entirely itself, and yet it's infinitely differentiated within itself. But the differentiations don't depart from it. They don't add to it. They don't subtract from it. They're just flavors of apparition that are occurring within it as its expression, as its being. But it itself is not affected by what appears within it. It's very difficult to think of this, to conceive of this, because it's paradoxical, it's unthinkable, it's illogical, it's irrational. But it doesn't need to be conceived. Simply feeling it, you discover for yourself the way that this is so.
Yoga is about learning to orient to what you actually are versus what you've been in the habit of believing and thinking that you are. What you actually are is discoverable by looking at what is actually present. Your field of experience, what you call your field of experience, is present. Present moment is present. All of the impressions and qualities that seem to be present in the present moment are present. Intelligence is present. Thought is present. All these qualities are present. Interpretation is present. But if you look closely at your actual present experience, you'll discover that it is uninterpretable. So these interpretations that are present, which claim to be about your experience, about the reality of your environment, the reality of your life, are fantasy. Because all you can find is the present moment. And if you look carefully at the present moment, you'll notice that it is uninterpretable. You cannot precisely and exclusively say what is happening. You can't describe it, you can't capture it in thought, you can't capture it in abstraction. It is only fully what it is in this instant. You don't need to capture it because you have it, you are it. So this mode of abstraction, this mode of interpretive thought is a fantasy. It's not accurate, it's not true in terms of what it pretends to be as a description of what you are and what your environment, what your circumstances are. So noticing this, investigating this, discovering this is yoga. It's this process of looking at what you actually are, what this actually is, what is findably, insufferably, self-verifyingly real, present, and orienting to that in contradistinction to orienting to the sloppy interpretations that you may be in the habit of orienting to through a faulty education that we've all been indoctrinated in, based on abstraction, based on the theory that interpretation can be accurate and can be relevant. If you look at your experience, you'll discover it's a mysterious flow, apparently. It's a mysterious synchronicity. Things line up, things happen. There's no, the interpretation pretends to have explanations of things, but these explanations are shoehorned into existence after the fact, whereas the mysterious flow is real time, does itself, is self-evident, is always right here. You've always known it, you've never known anything but it. And orienting to it directly, not through abstractions, is in fact all you've ever done. You don't function through abstractions, you function through directness. How can I move my hand? How can I speak? How can I think? How can I drive a car? How can I walk? I couldn't possibly tell you how I do these things, but I do them effortlessly and spontaneously because of what I am, because of what this is. And everything that happens whatsoever happens exactly the same way because of what this is, not because of some elaborate abstracted explanation or description, which can be made, which is never true, never accurate. So simply seeing that this is the case, and discovering that this is the case, and letting the self-validating nature, the self-verifying nature of what you discover, of the nature of what is actually present, yes, here, your being, let it validate itself and then see that it invalidates the inaccuracy of all your abstractions, and or take the plunge and orient to what is true and reject orienting to what is not true. Now this may seem to be somewhat difficult due to habit, but that's neither here nor there. You know, when you see what's true, it's your choice. Do you want to orient to what's true, or do you want to orient to lies, to falsehoods? You know, it's your choice, really. Most people, ignorantly, admittedly, choose falsehoods. In yoga, if you're a successful yogi, you choose truth. You choose reality. And that's basically your choice.
In yoga of radiant presence, one of the main phenomena we come up against is the seduction of identification. The seduction of being drawn into identifying with our interpretation, identifying with our perspectives, identifying with whatever we're holding ourselves to be or holding our situation to be. This identification initially, and as one starts off in yoga, seems to be the problem. And initially in yoga, we're fighting to get outside that identification, fighting to discover the presence of naked experience, of actuality as it is, outside of the context of our interpretive frameworks, to be able to investigate and acclimatize ourselves to this nature in order to learn what we actually are outside of this context of interpretation, this compulsive, addictive framework that we're compulsively drawn into. And yet this addiction persists continually, forever. And as we become more sophisticated in yoga, we learn that this addiction is not the enemy, it is of the nature of the radiance that is compulsively, intensely, obsessively engaged with itself. It's exploring itself with an intense thirst, an intense inquisitiveness in order to investigate itself, to be with itself, to dance with itself. And what shows up is the aspect of our getting entrapped in these interpretive frameworks is energized by and is an aspect of this fundamental self-engagement of reality with itself that is ever present. So as we become more sophisticated in yoga, we learn to live with this intense investment in interpretation, and to notice that it occurs as a subsystem, as a relatively small event within the vast context of the full presence of the experiential field, the full presence of the radiance, most of which is outside of and not within the framework of the obsessive interpretation that the mind generates. The interpretation essentially exists only in imagination, even though when one's absorbed in it, it can seem permeative, it can seem to apply to everything and to seem to be the entirety of reality that one's inhabiting. But in actuality, the interpretive framework is a small mental event which is occurring in the vastness of the experiential field, most of which is not imagination, most of which is not interpretation. Your field of vision has no interpretation in it whatsoever. It's just the presence of patterns of light energy. Your field of hearing has no interpretation in it whatsoever. It's just the presence of sound energy, and so on. All of the sense fields are just the presence of uninterpreted raw energy patterns, infinite, unresolvable, fractal patterns that cannot be resolved to being one way or another, even though the interpretive mechanism oversimplifies them and ignores this uninterpretability in order to be able to interpret them, to be able to say, oh, this is a hand, this is the face, this is a wall, when in fact all it is unresolvable patterns of light that one can't know what they are, except as this radiance, except as this unresolvable miraculous presence that is always here. In the realm of imagination and thought, there's this compulsive, seeming meaningfulness that spins out this narration, that spins out these interpretations, that this is this, that's that, this is what's happening, this is what's going on, and it's all very important, and I'm me, and it's it, and I have to, involve myself and deal with all of these implications because they seem to be very important. But all of that involvement only occurs in this small dimension, the small bandwidth of imagination. And in fact, all of that energy is itself just like light. It's actually just spontaneously appearing radiance, spontaneously appearing unresolvable energy. And even though it masquerades as conceptual thought, that masquerades as being about something, in actual fact, it's about nothing whatsoever other than its own appearance. So the presence of the field of light is about nothing but the presence of the field of light. And the presence of the field of thought is likewise about nothing but the presence of the field of thought. Concepts are essentially meaningless. They seem to be meaningful because they take advantage of the synchronicity whereby all the apparent unresolvable patternings that appear are synchronistically and meaningfully reflecting each other and echoing each other. So everything that occurs is meaningfully related to everything else that occurs just by the very nature of what it is, because it is this one thing, it is this one field of radiance that is pregnant with meaning, is pregnant with intelligence, which shows up as all of this raw, uninterpretable information, as well as the patterns of thought which claim to be interpretations, which claim to be concepts that have something accurately to do with something else, i.e. a world and objects and beings and so on. But in fact, all of that really is nothing but unresolvable radiance. Sure, it's profoundly intelligent, profoundly meaningful, but it's not about anything other than itself. It's not about anything other than the primal fact of this exquisite, ecstatic, blissful event, this big bang that's occurring right here, right now, as your experience. This right here is absolute reality, just exactly the way it is, exactly what it is, exactly the way it appears. The reality of your being, the reality of your experience, is the only thing that exists. Yoga is simply the process of recognizing this, that you already know to be the case completely, and deprogramming yourself from all of the misinformation that you've been brainwashed in about what this is that is not true. The truth is very simple and obvious, which is that your experience is, and it is as it is. It looks the way it looks. It feels the way it feels. And that's the entire story. There's nothing beyond that. There's nothing more than that. But the way that it is what it is can be explored with an enormous degree of subtlety and detail when you learn to approach it as it is, which is irrationally, outside the process, outside the bounds of thought that involves process or logic. You know, when you learn to have access to and learn to respect the inherent intelligence, which is instantaneous knowing, it's instantaneous engagement of intelligence that is alone competent to investigate what this really is, because what this is so absolutely irrational, absolutely illogical, that the conscious mind completely founders when it tries to make sense of it, which is, of course, why we have this such wildly exaggerated, erroneous versions that constitute of what this is, that constitutes consensus reality. So yoga is actually very, very simple. It's simply a matter of learning to really recognize, look at what you actually are experiencing and trust that it is true, and let yourself notice what it is in great detail, and notice the way that it is what it is in great detail and with great subtlety, which is easy to do because you've been doing it all your life. Of course, the rub comes in of the complication of the mind and the power of mind to be spinning an alternative narrative and to seduce your awareness, to distract your attention into believing that this alternate version actually is important and has validity and is more true than the simple, obvious, direct version that is being presented as your experience. So it's all really very simple. The complexity comes in the degree of seduction, the degree of addiction. I was having a conversation this morning talking about different spiritual traditions from the point of view of whether they're primitive or not, or modern, or there's different approaches. None of that applies at all. There is no history. There is no primitive. There is no modern. There is no evolved. All there is this. This right here, right now. And what it is cannot be said. Is it primitive? Is it modern? Is it this? Is it that? All of these different ways of qualifying it are just telling stories that exist only in imagination. They're fantasies. Only this that is here exists. And it exists in the way that it exists. It is what it exists, what it is. And nothing whatsoever that can be said or thought about it has any truth whatsoever. Yoga, of course, is relaxing into the recognition of this fact, relaxing into the recognition of this actuality, just as it is, and seeing the irrelevance of all of the mind's enormous efforts to qualify it and quantify it and spin stories about it, trying to say whether it's this or that, how it works, all of this defining, where we define what is this, we define ourselves as existing, we define space as existing, we define time as existing, we define all these things into existence that don't have any existence whatsoever in the way that these definitions imply that they do. The challenge of reality is it's too simple for us. It's too simple for the educated mind, the human indoctrinated mind, which tries to make everything complex. This is so simply this that is here, this that has always been here, this that you have always been, right here, right now, just this, just like always, is the goal of spirituality, is the supreme condition, is the absolutely transcendental absolutely divine, you may call it, absolute of reality itself. And it is all that exists. It is what you are. It is what the world is. It's what everything is. So it's very simple. It already is what it is and nothing other than it is, and it's right here, right now. The rub comes in that we don't recognize it. We think of it as being our limited human self living in our difficult human world with its suffering and its challenges and its limitations and its frustrations and its lack and its incompleteness. And then we imagine some sort of final condition out, something out there that if we got to that, then everything would be great. That is where the money is. That's where the pleasure is. That's where the fulfillment is. But not here, because here it's just little old me and my little old crappy world. But all of that's a complete misunderstanding. It comes from non-recognition of the nature of this condition that is present here. And yoga consists of essentially remedial training in recognizing and developing sensitivity to be able to recognize and perceive what is here, what this is, what you are. That's all that it is. It's really that simple. I think a great deal of spirituality suffers from the difficulty of not really knowing what it's about. You know, people go through all these elaborate trainings and meditations, and they change their names and they wear funny clothes, and all these different things happen. And there's a sort of a vague notion of the point of it all is something that's going to happen somewhere out there that's going to be great or spectacular. And I think frequently the simple recognition that it's about what is right here, right now, already the case, what this already is, what you already are, that is the point of it all. That's the entirety of what all the fuss is about. So, here we are. Here this is. Beginning and end of the story, as always. This is where you started, this is where you'll end. Mind you, there being no beginning and no end. So I might think of myself as, oh, I'm Peter Brown, and I'm this person, and I live in this world, and I have such and such a social status, and such a life history, and all of these elaborations that I think of as me. That is me, and then it exists in a context of relatively not me, which is the world, the environment, other people, other beings, and so on. All of this identification exists only in the imagination. In actuality, what you are is the entire transcendental subtle energy system that all of this is, that all of this is made of. And when I say all of this, I mean all of this. And it is this transcendental energy system that engages in spirituality, that engages in yoga, and that we are concerned with here. That's one of the great shortcomings of most modern spirituality, is that it addresses itself and concerns itself with individual people and humans as they're identifying with themselves, trying to improve their positions, none of which has anything whatsoever to do with, or I shouldn't say anything whatsoever, but let's say has very little to do with what's actually occurring. So, yoga is essentially the process of coming to recognize this system that you actually are, in contradistinction to the limited human persona, human, animal that you may identify yourself as being. Coming to recognize what that is, and in this recognition, you come to recognize the way that it works. You come to recognize, so to speak, what it is, what it's doing, where it is, all of these aspects and the implications of what it actually is. What you actually are becomes clear, and then you discover the being that you are and the world you live in, and the accommodation to that is the process of yoga, is the process of life itself, of reality being itself. So this is our concern here. There we are. is our concern here. This is what we are interested in. And the process and engagement of yoga is concerned with this presence that you actually are, not the limited presence that you may be used to identifying yourself as being. Now, it's subtle because, of course, the two are one. The limited being you identify yourself as being is actually the being that you are, but in a very partialized and qualified and censored way. And these partializations and qualifications don't exist in reality. In reality, you're the entire system that you are, not merely the aspects that you're used to partializing and identifying with as being yourself. I want to talk today about a couple of interesting ways to approach this that you may find useful. First, what we're interested in is this actuality that is present, this reality, comprehensively, that alone exists, that you are, that the world is, and so on. Yoga, of course, is the investigation of what this is, coming to see, coming to know most intimately and most clearly and certainly what it is. So, a couple of ways that you might find valuable to approach it. One way is that this is always exactly the way that it is without any variation whatsoever. In other words, this is what it is without any, it doesn't change whatsoever depending upon what seems to be happening or what you seem to be experiencing and all of that. So just noticing the presence of this, what I call radiant presence, this actuality is as it is unvaryingly. You can sit alone in a room for a half hour and you'll notice all sorts of thoughts and moods and experiences, and you'll notice, you look around, this and that. But this, what it is, does not change in the tiniest bit. It is what it is beyond space and time, independently of what it may seem to appear as, or what sorts of energies may seem to be appearing. It may be appearing as, or within it, or however you want to put it. So that's one aspect that you may find useful. Another aspect is don't think in terms of nouns, think in terms of verb. This is, as humans, we're very used to thinking in terms of nouns, what things are. This is this, that's that. This is the world, this is consciousness, this is experience, this is me, this is my body, this is, all of these things that we try to name and designate and delineate from each other. But try approaching this as more of a verb. It's an action. It's an experiencing. It's the only thing that's happening here, with no nouns at all. Very much in the same way as at night there's a dreaming, and there's no things there. There's no nouns. There's no objects. Now, it's obviously not uneventful. It presents us all of this incredible richness of information and configurations of experiential patterns, with all these characteristics showing up as different patterns in the field of vision and various sense fields and thought and so on and so forth. But all of this consists of an absolute dynamism, a continual shifting and moving, never settling down into any particular configuration. Now, since a thing per se is a particular configuration, and since it never actually settles down into a particular configuration, there aren't any things. And so attending to this, noticing this, looking at your experience in this way, is maybe something that you might find useful. Yoga is not about changing anything. Yoga is not about adjusting your experience at all. In yoga, in the starting condition, the initial condition, let's say, a person who is entirely a newbie, completely with no spiritual development at all, let's say. They orient to their experience in terms of their interpretations. So they gullibility will tend to believe, to whatever extent, that the world is, their reality is what they think it is, what they've been led to believe it is, what their interpretations hold it to be. Now, in the course of yoga, one discovers that these interpretations are inaccurate, and one discovers that one's experience is completely beyond interpretation. This does not mean suppressing interpretation. This does not mean leaving interpretations. This does not mean in any way that interpretations are bad and uninterpretation is good. It merely means discovering the actual context of experience. Interpretation will always spontaneously occur because the workings of the way intelligence is structured in human evolutionary level, let's say, is such that the mind is constantly churning out these interpretations. Yoga is not about leaving interpretation and going to uninterpretation. Yoga is about discovering that interpretation occurs in the context of that which is uninterpretable, in the context of that which is utterly beyond interpretation. And these, you might say, two conditions coexist. One is not superior or inferior to the other. So, and yet in the course of yoga, because in initial yoga, we are experts at interpretation and we know very little about uninterpretation, and we aren't even aware that interpretation exists. There can be an emphasis on exploring, on getting outside of interpretation, so to speak, on exploring uninterpreted experience and coming to become more familiar with it, its nature, and so on. But this does not mean that the goal of yoga is uninterpreted experience, and the point of yoga is to get out of interpretation. This is merely, in the initial phases of yoga, this is a remedial tactic to remedy the fact that we're so heavily invested in interpretation. So we need to counterbalance that by exploring, becoming more familiar with the other half of our experience, so to speak, which is the uninterpreted actuality that it all consists of. And then, as yoga develops, as yoga matures, one settles into the actual condition, which of course has been the only condition that one has ever been in, of being this vast, uninterpretable actuality that one always has been, within which interpretive frameworks are being generated and are being explored by consciousness in the context of the uninterpreted actuality. This is the sole condition. This is the condition you've always been in. It's the condition you were in before you got interested in spirituality. It'll be the condition you're in after you're a fully realized being. So the point is, again, not to change anything. The point is not to get out of interpretation or to suppress interpretation. The point is to become familiar with the context of interpretation, what interpretation is, that it's an exercise of intelligence and imagination within the context of this vast, inconceivable actuality that alone exists. The goal of yoga is to recognize what is here, what this is, what you are. It is simple, it is whole, it is immediately present, it is complete. It is in a constant state of its fullness. It's independent of what it may look like. It's independent of what the mind may interpret as is happening. And the challenge in yoga, of course, by and large, is that we're so inundated in orienting to our experience in terms of our interpretations, in terms of our narrations about what's happening and what we are, and our definitions of all the complexity that we imagine this reality to consist of, that we may be blind to or relatively insensitive to the fundamental actuality that it fundamentally is. So yoga, in essence, is very, very simple. It's simply recognizing what is already always the case, which of course we're fully doing all the time. So in a way, yoga is recognizing that you're recognizing it already. But as I say again, the challenge, of course, is the distraction of interpretations and holding them to be primary, whereas in actual fact, the fundamental condition is primary, and the interpretations are abstractions. They're hypotheses about what the fundamental condition is being interpreted as being. So it's really very simple. This is here exactly as it is. It is inherently and fundamentally uninterpretable due to its nature. And so all interpretations are partializations, oversimplifications of it that are abstracted conceptually in imagination from the actuality here that is uninterpretable. And these, as I say, these interpretations are, of course, dependent upon being defined, dependent upon being finite, dependent upon being knowable and describable, as opposed to this actuality, which is fully knowable but completely indescribable. The very nature of what this is, the nature of radiant presence, is infinite. Not in the poetic sense, certainly, but more fundamentally, perhaps in the mathematical sense. It has no resolution. It has no way of resolving exactly what sorts of qualities are appearing, what they consist of, and in what way they are structured or organized, or what they consist of to any degree whatsoever. Coming to see this directly enables the relaxation of this, the compulsion, this overwhelming drive to describe, to interpret, even though that activity will continue because it's the nature of mind to do so, but it's fundamentally unimportant for the purposes of yoga, which is concerned with relaxing into this fundamental condition that you consist of. The implication of what this is radically different than the implication of what our interpretive frameworks or our interpretive narrations imply. The narrations imply all sorts of necessity, lack, problems, challenges, beginnings and endings, incompletenesses, partializations, threats, all of these sorts of things. Whereas nothing like that actually exists in actuality. Actuality itself is intrinsically complete, full, whole, invulnerable, eternal beyond space and time, and so on. So the goal of yoga is to discover this for yourself, and the path of yoga is to relax into this actuality and notice that it is other than the way that the interpreted mind, the interpretive frameworks, hold it to be. This is easy to do relatively because it's quite clear that this is the case. It's not hidden. The nature of what this is clearly displayed. But, of course, again, there's the seduction of into interpretation, which, of course, has been our lifelong habit by and large. You don't need to repress interpretations or language. You don't need to do any other different sorts of behaviors in terms of how you manage your body or anything. The only thing that you have to do is see what this is. You don't need to change anything. You just need to see what it is. See what it is that's occurring here. Which is easy to do because it's not concealed. It's plain to see what's right here. But if the difficulty is that we already think we know what it is, And so when looking at what this is, we look at it with the preconceived beliefs of what we're holding it to be. So in order to discover what it actually is, you have to look at it without those preconceptions. You have to let yourself look directly at the phenomena of your experience itself without holding it to be in one way or another way, and look and see what it actually is, and see what you actually are experiencing in the moment. Doing this is yoga, and doing this will clearly, plainly, and completely reveal what this is, what you are, which is vastly different than you're used to thinking you are. The payoff is that the implications of what we usually think we are, the implications of a consensus reality, sort of a definition of what you hold yourself to be, is challenging. It's very problematic. We hold ourselves to be limited beings. We hold ourselves to be susceptible to the environment. We hold ourselves to be vulnerable. We hold ourselves to be susceptible to death, which seems terrifying or at least problematic. All of these sorts of things. But when you see what this really is, then you discover its nature is such that none of these things actually apply. But you have to see this for yourself in order to enjoy the certainty of that. It's not a matter of adopting affirmations or adopting, some philosophy that holds to be that way. It's a matter of seeing for yourself conclusively and self-verifyingly that it is the way that it is. And this is yoga. This is radiant presence. It's not what you think it is. It's inconceivable. It's not what you've ever thought anything is. Yoga is the discovery of this fact. Yoga is simple because the nature of this presence that is here is not concealed. If you look carefully and sensitively at your experience, you'll discover its astounding nature, and especially the way in which it completely and utterly transcends and is other than what you're used to thinking of it as being. This investigation is yoga. It's very simple and very complex and very subtle. The complexity comes primarily from the depth of the entrapment that our addiction to our habitual orientation to what our life is, to what we are and what our world is, has been our lifelong interpretation of this condition. The addition to that is very, very difficult to see through at first, and very difficult to relinquish or to see in the context of its true perspective of the nature of what this actually is. So if you're fortunate, yoga can be a relatively graceful progression of discovery, slowly moving into the revelation that your experience is very much other than you're used to thinking of it as being. But also, of course, there can be more turbulent paths of unfoldment that can occur in the contrast, in the stark shock of how different this is to what we're used to thinking of it as being. This can provoke certain degrees of unsettlement for some people, for some of us. But yoga is the discovery of the true condition. And we're very, 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 very fortunate that what this actually is as it is. What this actually is an astounding condition of beauty, of transcendence, of intelligence, of profound meaningfulness, and of eternal being, of eternal well, just leave it at that, which is in sharp contrast to the narrow, petty, frightening, and precarious existence that we may imagine we have as human beings in these decaying bodies with a sell-by date rapidly approaching, and this precarious situation that we may seem to think we're in, as regards to our happiness and our personal status and our social status and our financial situation and all these various other things that seem to be so trying. Here this is, right now, the entirety of everything that is right now, absolutely inconceivable. The intricacy of these patterns, light shining, sensation appearing, thought appearing, the dance of the atoms, all of this inconceivable intricacy, this inconceivable dynamism that this moment consists of, just instantaneously appearing, being controlled by its own nature. It's not being done, it's not being steered, it's not being aimed, it simply is. And in this isness, it's absolutely complete, absolutely comprehensive, absolutely inconceivable, indescribable. We make these pathetically oversimplified attempts at describing it as if it was made up of certain small elements that we had some vague idea what these things were, which is absurd. No one knows what anything is. Just this inconceivable patterning appearing in this instant. But we don't need to know it. We don't need to abstract it. We don't need to describe it. You are it. You are living it. You are doing it. Your very being is it. And you know this in the knowing of your being. You know this. You feel this in the feeling of your being. Right here, right now. That's all that there is. That's the entirety. And that's not a lesser thing than if you had some doctorate in every science or every branch of knowledge known to man. It's a greater thing. You're feeling your being right in this instant. You're feeling this presence just as it is right in this instant is the entirety. It's inconceivable, absolutely inclusive, absolutely whole, absolutely alive, absolutely potent, completely being what it's being, doing what it's doing. And what you are is it. You are this. You are this that is here. Realizing this fact is the whole of yoga. But you already know it. It's not like, it's sort of a joke, all of this yoga and realizing in spiritual practice. You already know it. You'll do yoga and you'll struggle with all these things and you'll say, yeah, but what about this? What about that? And at the end of the day, where are you left off? Where do you get deposited? What's the end of the path? Right here. This it's right here. Always has been, always will be. You already are this. So feel it, know it. You do feel it. You do know it. Just, let go of the absurd arrogance the absurd, arrogant pretense that you can possibly get a handle on it or describe it or do something with it. This is reality. This is you. This is the real world. This is the absolute. This is God. This right here, just as it is. The only issue in spirituality is that the mind is powerful to interpret what is occurring, what things are, what this is. And all of its interpretations are inaccurate. But unfortunately, we generally don't realize that these interpretations are inaccurate. And we buy into them more or less hook, line, and sinker. And the difficulty with these interpretations is that they come with difficult implications. Implications like, I'm going to die. Implications like, I'm limited, I'm vulnerable. All these kinds of implications that that show up as a result of these interpretations. Now, the powerful fact is that all interpretations are inaccurate. No interpretation of what this is can be true, can be accurate. And coming to see this is the goal of spirituality is the path of yoga, looking to discover that what you think this is wrong. It is as it is. The good news is it's not hidden, it's plainly displayed. The nature of what this is completely clear and available to examine, to explore. And this is the cutting edge of yoga, to look at what this is, which will invalidate, if you do it sensitively and intelligently, will invalidate your interpretations of what you think it is, and hence invalidate all the difficult implications that the interpretations you hold imply. It's so far from a simple mechanistic cause and effect situation like people ordinarily think of it as being. It runs on intelligence and intention and purpose, all of which is completely transcendental. It's not purpose about people. It's not purpose about humans. It's not purpose about situations. It's purpose as a medium of exploration of infinity. Obviously, everything I'm saying is gibberish, but that's appropriate because what we're talking about cannot be talked about. And this is really the point, is to come to recognize this as it is and how utterly this is beyond anything you can think it is or anything you're used to thinking that it is, anything that people ordinarily talk about or think about in terms of thinking about themselves, thinking about the world, thinking about what's happening, thinking about how it works. None of that actually applies. What's going on here is so beyond that as to be inconceivable. But this can be known directly. You can know this directly. In fact, you already do know it directly. And yoga, of course, is the path of coming to see this, coming to relax into this clearly and certainly as it is. This that is here, what's present right here, right now, is absolute reality. What it is utterly beyond what can be thought what humans think it is. We typically think of ourselves existing in an objective world and the social situations and all the various other trappings of the normal human worldview that we're familiar with. And this is one way to see it, but what it is intrinsically is utterly beyond that. Coming to see what this actually is, in distinction to what we're used to thinking that it is the goal of spirituality. It turns out that what it actually is astounding in its nature and its properties. And in coming to see this and coming to recognize this, one gets to partake of the flavor of this superlative nature that this actuality happens to consist of, which is, the payoff, so to speak, of spirituality. Aside from the fact that it's true and actual, as opposed to our ordinary way of thinking of it, which is inaccurate, untrue, and hence not really actual. For purposes of investigation, we have the great good fortune that actuality is clearly displayed. It's not concealed or hidden right here in the guise of your experience. Your experiential field is the presence of reality. And so it's possible to investigate and study what this actually is, this actuality that is present. And in studying it without preconceptions, you will discover the ways in which it is utterly beyond what you're used to thinking of it as being, which will thereby invalidate these erroneous worldviews, these erroneous interpretations, and come to reveal more and more clearly what this actually is, what you actually are, which will enable you to enjoy the implications of that, which is the whole of spirituality. It's pretty sweet deal. It's here, it's doable, check it out. Typically, people miss what's happening here because we concentrate on the content. We concentrate on what we are interpreting, the events that are appearing, the elements that are appearing, the objects that are appearing, the situations that are appearing. Our bodies, our environments, these objects, other people, communication, words, thoughts, emotion, all of, other subtle flavors and moods and extrasensory vibes and so on. All of this that fills our experience with information, with content. And typically we think of this as what's happening, this as what's here. But in doing so, we're ignoring the fact of experience. Experiencing itself is here. And experience is not just simply some inner transparency, some theoretical event that enables all of this actuality to appear. The experiencing, the presence of experience, is the concrete thing that is here. The presence of experience enables all of the seeming information to appear, but the information appears because it is experience, because it is consciousness, because it is, radiant presence. This thing that is here is invisible. We don't see it. We see the content, but we don't see the carrier wave. We don't see the thing itself. We see the waves, but we don't see the ocean. For example, in a dream. In a dream, there's all of this event going on, whatever seems to be happening, and we're lost in it, and we're completely invested in it, and we're living this life of whatever seems to be appearing there. And we wake up and we realize none of that stuff was actually there. The only thing that was there was dreaming. The dreaming was invisible. The dreaming was not appearing as anything except for the apparition of all of the conditions and objects and information that is interpreted as being the content of the dream. It's interpreted as being the events that are occurring in the dream. And yet, none of that event is actually there. The only thing that's actually there is the dreaming itself. Likewise, here in the waking condition or in any condition of experience whatsoever, all of this content, all of this apparition is here only because of the fundamental actuality whose nature enables it to appear like all of this. But the appearances appear because of what this is that is here. The appearances aren't here on their own autonomously, just being here, which is, that's common human consensus reality thought. We think objects just exist objectively. They're just here. All this stuff is just here. It's just, it's like there was a Big Bang sometime, and then all this stuff is just here as a result of all that Big Bang bouncing around or whatever. But this is a fundamental misconception. What is here is an inconceivable actuality. Call it consciousness, call it experiencing. I call it radiant presence. You can call it the presence of the divine God. You can call it, Shakti. There's all sorts of names and ideas that are associated with this actuality in various spiritual traditions. And all that's fine, but it doesn't matter what you call it, of course. The important thing is the thing itself. And coming to recognize this is the essential business of yoga. Coming to recognize that there is a fundamental reality that exists, that all this is, that you are, that alone is what is here. And it's not made up of the sum total of all these appearances. It's something entirely other. It's something that is here, and because it is here, then all the appearances are enabled to appear. But they only appear because this fundamental actuality is here, this fundamental being. Since we're typically in a human normalcy, the normal human milieu, we're woefully ignorant of the existence of this fundamental actuality. The purpose of yoga is to remedy that. The purpose of yoga is to direct our attention at exploring experience to come to discover this fundamental actuality that consists of. Experience is a felt presence. It's a felt actuality. And in this feeling, there is no designation. There is no designated portions. There is no separating out this and that. Experience is a felt presence, which is an inclusive continuum. And as one notices this radiant presence that is actual, that is right here, its nature communicates itself, and nature reveals itself through its own spontaneous self-engagement, which is this presence of experiencing, which is your experience. Consciousness seemingly generates all sorts of partialized perspectives, which are floating around dynamically within the experiential field, each of which has a different implication, a different flavor. And, the dominant conscious perspective of identification with oneself as being a particular person in a particular situation, in a particular, curriculum vitae, a narrative of what's going on in your life, is sort of a dominant gestalt of a lot of these sorts of perspectives that are floating around. But there's myriad, countless infinite perspectives that are inconceivable and nonverbal that are also floating around simultaneously, that are always being experienced. This never-ending flow of moods and vibes and flavors and insights and memories and random inspirations and fantasy and daydreams and so on that experience obviously consists of. And all of that is nothing other than this that is here, this meta system of the radiant presence, this whole, this transcendental whole that you are, that alone exists. Where is here? So you look at here and you might say, well, here is this room I'm in. Well, so you head up and you go into another room, And then, well, the room has changed, but here hasn't changed. Here it's still right here. You're right here. You get up and you leave your house. And where are you? Well, I'm here. So where is this here? Then you lie down and you get tired at the end of the day, you lie down and you drift off to sleep. Where are you? Here. Where is here? Here isn't even in the world anymore. And you start dreaming and you seem to be in some situation, whatever. Where are you? Here. And here at this point is where? So what is this? Where is this here? If you look closely, here is the only location that exists. Here is the only space that exists. So where is this location? Where is this space? Now, this isn't just a frivolous philosophical question. You're feeling here, you're feeling this, you're hearing this right now. You're feeling this is here, right? So what is, look very closely at what this here is. What is it? Where is it? What is everything's relationship to it? What is its relationship to everything? What is this here that is so self-evident, so obvious, so constant, and yet everything exists in relation to it, and it exists in relation to nothing. And then as you feel here, well, obviously, I am here. Great, so what is this I? Where is this I that is here? And again, you find the same thing. It's always I, it's always here. Invariably, without relationship or without dependency upon what it looks like. Here doesn't change. The here-ness of here doesn't change depending upon what it appears to be, what it looks like. This here is present. It is present. It is manifestly, self-verifyingly present. It's not a concept that it's present. It's an undeniable self-verifying fact. It's a condition that it is present. This presence is reality. It's actuality. And it's not material. And materiality, the material world, the objective world, appears in this presence and also disappears in this presence. And the subjective world, the psychological world, appears in this presence and also disappears in this presence. So what is this presence? It does not come and go. And it's right here, so you can investigate it. It's very convenient. It's strongest to approach it from a point of view of being grounded in your own being. Approach it from a point of view of the strength of yourself, the strength of your presence. What I mean by this is it's possible to have a kind of a passive approach to all this, to sort of just approach it. Wow, what's out there? I wonder, I want to find it. I need to find some openness. I need to find some transcendence. I need to find something, bigger than me or stronger or powerful or whatever. So you're sort of in a position of, you're being passive to what's there. You're being sort of in a position of needing to find it, needing to acquire it or discover it. This is not such a good way to approach it because it's very easy to get disoriented sweeping through all of these various possible perspectives. I strongly recommend you try to stay oriented with the fact of your being. So this starts with, I use the first person, but this will apply to you, what you would say to yourself or what you would see for yourself. I am here. This being exists. This being is actual. And feeling the truth of my being, that I am here. I am this perspective. I am the center, the center, so to speak, of my experience. So it's rounded in me. It's oriented around me, the absolute undeniable fact and truth of my being, the truth that I am exactly as I am. And this gives a strength. This gives a position. It's an anchoring to the truth of your being, to your authority, the authority of your being, the authority that you are. Excuse me. That you are as you are, that you are what you are, which is absolutely genuine and is one with the very being of reality. Your being is the being of reality. So you're absolutely grounded in presence. You have the authority of presence, the authority of being. And so from that position, then you can explore all of these possibilities, all these options, all these different perspectives, but you're exploring it from a position of strength. You're exploring it from a position of yourself as the explorer, rather than sort of going passive and saying, bring on whatever, and you just get carried around hither and yon by whatever happens to wash over you. This is it, just exactly this, right here, right now. There is nothing whatsoever other than right here, right now. Reality is a point event, and the point is this point, right here, right now. Everything is this. Everything happens here. Everything happens now. Your entire history is a memory and a set of somatic sensations or whatever, intricate patterning that's appearing now. Your sensory experience of the world, of everything, whatever seems to be appearing in your senses, is now, right here, right now. No other time, no other place. The future, your imaginations of the future, your imaginations of are they ever gonna sort out this mess we're in? What on earth is going on anyway? All of that is right here, right now. It's all just patterns of experiential qualities appearing instantaneously, you could say in consciousness, but there's no separate consciousness separate from the patterns of experiential qualities. They are one. They are just this apparition right here, right now. It is essentially miraculous. What is it? How is it? How's it happen? What's doing it? None of these questions can be answered, but they don't need to be answered because we have the actuality. We are the actuality. You are this. That alone exists right here, right now. That's the whole story. That's the entire story. And coming to notice the way that this is self-evidently true, that the way that this is self-evidently exactly like this and no other way, is the engagement of yoga, the engagement of spirituality, which can lead only to this realization because there's nothing else for it to lead to. There's no other reality to find. The only reality to find is this reality right here, right now. And when you actually find it and fully realize it, what you'll be realizing fully is exactly what it is right here, right now. There's no grander, improved version. There's no, choirs of angels singing that are singing right now, right here. This is it. I want to talk today about the absolute inclusiveness of this, of the radiance, of what this is. Everything whatsoever is this one thing that is here. In normal human thought, we're used to dividing things and differentiating things. This is this, that's that. You know, this is a body, this is physical, this is thought, it's mental, this is emotion, this is, you know, this is you, this is me, this is over there, this is over here. We have all of this slicing and dicing that creates an infinite division of seemingly separate things and separate qualities existing on different levels of, you know, subjectivity, objectivity, all of these divisions we're so familiar with. All of this is one thing. All of these divisions, all of these conditions, all of these objects, all of these events, all of these experiences are this one thing, this present reality that alone exists, that you are, the reality of radiant presence. And it's all absolutely nothing other than this. So there's no difference, essentially, in essence, to be made between anything and anything else. Everything is this that is here. Your thought is this. The light that's shining is this. Your being is this. You know, your experience of your world is this. Your experience of other humans is this. Your experience of yourself, your body is this. It's all this one actuality that is here, that is one thing. You know, we're used to thinking of this as, you know, a sort of an openness that allows all of this, the accumulation of all of these different things to exist within this space or something. But we're not used to thinking of this space as a thing that is what all of these different things actually are. You know, we think of the separate parts as the actualities. You know, my body is the actuality, this room is the actuality, this computer is the actuality, but it's not actually like that. This that is here is the actuality, and the computer is it. My body is it. The room is it. You all are it. My thoughts are it. All, you know, what this is a very strange, to think about it, it's a very strange thing because it appears with such an inconceivable variety of textures and differentiations, you know, light, sound, touch, thought, this, that, you know, all of the infinite, literally infinite differentiation of the qualities and things and objects and events that appear in your experience are nothing other than this one thing. You know, they're all you could think of it as all the different kinds of waves that can appear on this, in this ocean that is here. That's sort of a weak metaphor, and it's been very well used, but it indicates the essential fact that all of the differences, all of the separate objects and things are actually not separate. They're actually this one thing that alone exists, that looks like all of this elaboration. It looks like all of this differentiation, but it is actually just this one thing, including your consciousness, including the fact that it sees itself, it knows itself. There's not some separate awareness or consciousness that's somehow looking at this. This itself is conscious. It is subjective, it is objective, it has all of these different poles or different aspects that we may be used to holding it in terms of, but it itself is just itself, which includes all of that. Anything whatsoever that is actual is actually this radiant presence that alone exists. And it's nothing, it's not the tiniest bit different than you've always known it to be. Nothing is different. Nothing is negated. Nothing is changed. Nothing is turned from something into something else. It's just exactly the way it has always seemed to be. But what it really is this astounding condition that you are, that it is. In discovering, that may seem like, well, okay, that doesn't sound like such a big thing in itself. But in discovering that this is true, the power of this discovery is primarily in the implication of what you are. You are this. You are all of this. You are the entirety. You're not a separate portion limited to a body that's going to die and is subject to all these external conditions. You are the totality. You are what is doing this. You are what is being done. You are everything. You know, you're not a part of something. You're not a part in relation to other parts. You are the whole, and the whole is in relationship with itself as all of this incredible dynamism and infinite differentiation. And what that feels like, the implication of that is very, very different than the implication of falsely identifying yourself as being apart, as being separate, as being small, as being dependent. There's no dependent. Nothing is dependent on anything. There's only this single actuality that is doing itself. And as it does itself, all of the details of it, of course, are being done in its doing itself. So nothing is dependent on anything else. Everything happens all at once, instantaneously, simultaneously. This amazing condition that is here is so radically and fundamentally different than what is held to be in consensus reality thought, that it can be difficult to approach it in terms of our ordinary ideas of ourselves as separate beings that are try to do things, that try to engage in spiritual practice, that try to do all of these, various things we try to do that we suppose may be a benefit to us in exploring what this is. But what's happening here is so fundamentally removed from any paradigm where there's an individual you that can achieve things by acting in certain ways. What this is that is here is a miracle. It's an inconceivable fullness, completeness, wholeness, transcendental actuality. This is the living presence of what has been called God. It can be called the absolute, it can be called the source, it can be called anything. But it's what's right here, right now. It's what this is. It's what your experience is. It's what the being of this actuality that is present right here is. And you are this. You are not a part of it. You're not in it. You are this. You are this whole thing that is here. Yoga is the practice of looking at your experience to notice the way that this is so, notice the way that this is the case. If you look at the fact of your experience, you'll notice a lot of things about it that are different, that deviate from the normal consensus reality understanding of it. For example, there's no time. It's always just now. There's no space. It's always just here. There's no, nothing can be found or unresolved. If you're looking for anything, it has too much information to say what it is in an instant. And in the next instant, it's already changed into a different configuration experientially. So you can't say what anything is, and it's already something else. And you can't say what that is, and so on forever. These are just a few very superficial examples of the way in which this actuality that is here is different from what people ordinarily think of it as being. There's only one thing that is here, and you are it. You are all of it. What you may call your experiential field is the totality of reality and it's what you are. It's your true body. It's your true consciousness. It's your true being. And this is it. The only thing here is experience. The only thing you've ever experienced is experience. You may be used to thinking that it's the experience of something. Like I may be used to thinking that this is the experience of my computer, or this is the experience of a Zoom talk, or experience of being in a room. But all these ofs are conceptual. They're interpretations, they're suppositions that that are erected in the imagination, generated in the imagination, as interpretations of what is happening here to explain this. But it's all hypothesis. There's no way to verify this. The only certainty is the fact of experience. Now, we're all familiar with this phenomenon in dreams. In dreams, there's experience, and it seems to be of whatever it seems to be of, whatever the events in the dream seem to be. And then when you wake up, if you're lucid in the dream, if you become aware you're dreaming, it becomes quite clear that there's nothing there. There's just experience itself, the dreaming itself, no things. The ofs, all those suppositions, those hypotheses were nothing more than hypotheses. Now, it seemingly may be difficult to wake up from the waking state to be able to verify that a similar condition is here. But even if you don't, it's not important, because it's easy to see that the only thing you know for sure is experience. You know, the things themselves are hypotheses. You know, I call when I'm looking at my computer, but all I have is the experience of certain colors and certain shapes that are appearing in experience. I don't know that there's a computer out there. All I know is there's the experience of these qualities that are clearly and obviously and self-verifying the experience, but whether or not they're anything more than that is guesswork. Now, we all live in this environment, this philosophical environment, where we get enormous reinforcement in terms of the communications we receive from other people and in language and all of this, reinforcing this idea. Reinforcing this idea that the experience is of things, that there are things out there. But no one knows. It's just an empty assertion. It's a hypothesis. It's guesswork. Maybe yes, maybe no, but you can't ever know. But what you can know for certain is experiencing exists. And this is very powerful, because you can investigate, what is this experiencing? And this is what yoga is. What is experiencing? What is this experiencing that is happening here? You can't really investigate the world, because that's just guesswork. All the scientists that have all the physicists building their $1 billion cyclotrons and what all, they think they're investigating the real world. All they're investigating is experience. They may as well be doing it in a dream. It'd be much cheaper. Except the dream might have dream money, and then it might be even more expensive, eh? Today, I'd like to talk about the relationship between the perspective of radiant presence and the normal human perspective. So what is here is radiant presence. It's nothing but radiant presence. Radiant presence is one thing. It has no parts, it has no pieces. It is an infinite inclusive continuum. It is what the word that we have from the human perspective that most clearly indicates it is experience. This that is here, this experiential field that is here, is what radiant presence is. It alone exists. It is the actuality, and the way that it is what it is what is actually happening. And the human perspective, which we're all very familiar with, where there are separate entities and beings and situations existing in an objective space, in a flow of time with history, past and future, with cause and effect, and all of these things that we're all very familiar with. In actuality, it is not true. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Now, in seeing, in coming to realize the perspective of radiant presence, the human perspective doesn't disappear. Rather, it's seen in its true context as it actually is, as a partialized perspective. Now, one aspect of the nature of radiant presence is, by its very nature, it is full of myriad perspectives and myriad dimensions that spontaneously generates, that just waft in and out and coexist with each other. The normal human perspective is another one of these, or another set of these perspectives that exist within it. Now, these perspectives all have actual existence, but none of them are absolutely true. They're all partialized perspectives, you might say. They're ways of seeing it. They're ways of spinning it. They're hypotheses about what is happening, in a sense. Although they're more than that, they're also sort of textural frameworks. So when one has some success in yoga and sees radiant presence and comes to understand its perspective, the human perspective doesn't disappear. It's seen as it truly is, as a partialized perspective. What is present is absolute reality, and it is not what you think it is. That's the crux of yoga right there. The starting point is what we think it is. The starting point is, our definitions of what we are, who we are, what our life is, what's happening, how it happens, what our capabilities are, how we live our life, how we engage with it. And all of that is inaccurate. All of that is untrue. So that's the starting point of yoga. And how do you proceed from there? Well, this is real. This is actuality that is present, even though it's not what you think it is. It is present. So you can investigate it. You can look into it. You can explore it. The real key to doing so is realizing that it's not what you think it is. If you're allowing yourself to assume that it is what you think it is, then there's nothing to investigate. You already know what it is. I'm Peter Brown, and I live in Sausalito, and this and that and the other. If that's all true, then yoga shmoka, there's nothing to do, right? But the problem with that is that actuality has some astounding properties that you miss out on, are not able to appreciate and enjoy, or even notice that they exist, unless you look into them. And these astounding properties do not exist in the human definitional realm, within the human milieu. They exist within reality as it truly is, within radiant presence. So yoga is the investigation of this that is here, this that you are, this experiential field, which is actually the totality of reality, and let yourself open to it as it truly is and discover what it really is. What is experience? Experience is just that's right here for us, but what is it? Everything whatsoever that you know is experience. You can't find anything other than experience. But what is it? The world is experience. Your body is experience. Your emotions is experience. Personality is experience. Your Your apartment, your house is experience. Everything you own is experience. You've never, ever been in relationship with anything whatsoever other than experience. But what is this experience? What is it? This is the question. This is the question that yoga tries to answer. And how do you answer it? By investigating. Look, here's experience right here. Look at it. What is it? What can you know about it? Well, it's present. It's always completely present. It's always present right here. Never anywhere else. It's always present right now. Never any other time. It's what it looks like is always changing. Absolutely. You never experience the same configuration of qualities twice. Never. It changes absolutely, and yet what it is doesn't change at all. And what experience is always exactly the same. It's the same now as it was yesterday, as it was when you were 2 years old, as it will be on your deathbed. What experience is just this, just experience, exactly the same. It'll always look different, but it'll never be different. It'll never become anything other than this that is present. But what is it? You can't answer this question conceptually. You can't answer it in words, but you can come to know very, very intimately and very, very profoundly what it is. In fact, you already do, because you're an expert in it. You've never been engaged with anything else, but you may not be aware that you're an expert in it, because you may think of yourself as an expert in your life or your body or your actions or your relationships or all these other things, which are actually nothing other than experience. So coming to notice what experience is and coming to settle into your deep knowledge, your deep knowing of it, your deep expertise of it, and deep appreciation of what this is profound and is what spirituality consists of. You yourself are nothing other than experience. If you ask the question, what am I? I am the experiencer. If I ask, what do I experience? The answer is experience. Experience is experience. And I'm doing the experiencing. I'm what's being experienced, and I'm the dynamic engagement of that to the extent there is one. This right here, and this that is here, is the whole of spirituality. Just this present reality, the present actuality of your experiential field is the whole. Nothing needs to happen, nothing needs to be changed, nothing needs to be found or lost, for that matter. Just this that is right here is the finish line. Of course, seeing that that's so is the challenge. But seeing that that's so doesn't consist actually of seeing anything. It consists of not seeing all that it's not so that the mind puts up. This isn't the finish line. This isn't so great. This is just the world. This is just my life. It's mediocre. It sucks. It's not good enough. It's not right. It's not God. It's not angels. It's not this and that, the other. All of these are stories that the mind tells itself. But when the mind isn't insisting on all of these facts and figures, when you just relax and be with what's actually here, what is it? What's the problem? what's missing, what's not enough, you know, there's no answer to any of that. This right here is a question mark. It's a bit of an exclamation point shaped question mark. Because it is very much what and as it is. But what that is can't be said, it can't be pinned down. But in that openness, in that open-endedness, in that complete indeterminacy is a freedom, is a delightful free fall, a delightful floating, bubbling, can't say what, mood, let's say, that this intrinsically is. That it doesn't need, again, it doesn't need to be found, just need to stop telling it it's not that. Stop saying, no, this is, you know, fill in the blank, this is my crappy life, this is limitation, this is being stuck in a world of matter, you know, this is space and time, this is this, that, and the other. All of which are just empty assertions because it can't be said what this is. And in that openness, in that indeterminacy, is a bliss, is the delightful quality. I'm jealous here. You all have all these fancy backgrounds. I need to start getting some fancy digital backgrounds. Just Steve, I guess. John's is natural. Anyway, and yeah, your virtual laundry room is very convincing. I think people are normally in the habit of identifying themselves with their bodies and their personalities and their thoughts and emotions, which is a misidentification of what you actually are. What you actually are is this that is here, this presence, this field of awareness, this bubble of experiencing. You actually have no body. Or you could say that your embodiment is all of the forms that appear in your experience. You actually have no thoughts. You have a profound intelligence that is not, it doesn't use thoughts or doesn't use logical processes. It just operates by absolute knowing and instant integrative assimilation of information, a correlation of information without process. And you're completely powerful. In the very same sense that the dreamer is controlling the dream, you are controlling this field of experience that you're experiencing. Now, mind you, what we ordinarily identify with perhaps as the body and the personality and the thoughts are present, but they are present as aspects of what you are, very much in the same way as my hand is present as an aspect of what I may ordinarily think I am. It's there, it's an aspect of it, it's doing what it's doing. It's like a complex organ of your being, of your embodiment that is appearing, and that is you, but you're more than it. You're not limited to just being it, any more than Peter Brown is limited to just being his hand. So the body, the personality, the thoughts are all here in the same way that your hand is here, but you are very much more than that, very much different than that. Now, in spirituality, I think a common problem is trying to approach it from being identified with the body-mind, with the personality. So I may think, oh yeah, that's right, there's this other me that's out there, but I'm me, Peter Brown, little me, sitting here, this human being is trying to relate to it or go to it that's out there, which is entirely erroneous because it's completely backwards. The real me is not Peter Brown. The real me is this being, this consciousness, this presence that is right here. And from that point of view, it all makes sense. Everything fits into place. But from the point of view of Peter Brown trying to relate to this somehow greater me that's somehow out there, it doesn't fit. It doesn't work because it's not actually like that. And I think that this is one of the greatest impediments within spirituality, is oriented to it from the point of view of the body mind, from the point of view of the individual human identification, which is not true and is not who you are. So this is why I recommend identifying, relaxing into the presence of experience, just feeling the presence of experience. Don't worry about identity or whether it's you or what. Just feel the presence of experience. And as you feel it very deeply and very fully, you'll begin to settle into its comprehensiveness, that it is here, it's all that is here. And you'll feel its intelligence, you'll feel its consciousness, you'll feel its vitality. It's not just some inert fact. It is an inconceivable, sensitive, conscious, alive presence. And this is what you really are. This is all that is really here. And of course, yoga is all about exploring this phenomenon, this fact. Feel this being. Feel the being of your presence, the being of this here. It's not an abstraction. It's not a concept. It's extremely concrete. It's extremely actual. This isness that is present. Feel it. See how obvious it is. Notice it. We don't usually give much attention to being. We're usually much more concerned with what is being, all of these apparitions, all the things in the environments and the circumstances. They may have the details of our lives, and we just take it for granted. Well, of course they are. Of course they have being, as if that was just some neutral, byproduct of the whole thing, or whatever. But feel this being. This being is the actuality. It is real. It's the soul reality, this isness, this being, this presence that is right here, right now. It is here-ness. It is now-ness. Now and here are abstractions that the mind generates about this being, this isness that is here. It presents with an infinity of apparitions, an infinity of colors and thoughts and sensations and smells and sounds and vibes and moods and infinite innuendo, just symphonies of flavorfulness and meaningfulness. That is, all of which is nothing other than this being, nothing other than this present. You can't find any of that. Any of that is absolutely unresolvable, absolutely unstable. Just an instability in the instant, a flickering of suggestion in the instant, and then it's completely and utterly gone forever. And yet this being, this isness, is just rock solid, absolutely unwavering, absolutely solid, always right here, right now. And this being is you. This being is the universe. This being is what is. This being is God. This being is the Atma. This being is consciousness. This being is everything, anything. There's nothing but this right here, right now. And let yourself notice this. Let yourself feel this and appreciate it. And the unwavering fact of this presence, the absolute constancy. It does not come and go. It's eternal. It's beyond space and time. Space appears in it. Time appears in it. But it has no space. It's always just here, everywhere. It has no time. It's always just exactly what we call now. But let yourself, give a little attention just to this being, to this presence. We're all very expert at giving our attention to all the phenomena of our lives and our thoughts and our consciousness and our emotions and our investments and our narratives. We're very expert at that. But how expert are we at just noticing this being, this presence? Feel the absolute comprehensiveness of it, and that you're not separate from it. You are. This is your being. You are this being. And the world is this being. And the being of the world and the being of you are not two different beings. It's this one being that is right here, right now. And this is what you are. You are this being. But I strongly recommend you let yourself experience this from time to time. It's the supreme value. It's the supreme profundity. It's the supreme miracle. I mean, here's this being. Where's it come from? It just is. What's putting it here? Well, it was just here. It's left over from the Big Bang. Okay. How much sense does that make? There's only one thing here. There's only one thing that exists. I call it radiant presence. I suppose if you were a materialist, you might call it a quantum field. You might call it a field of consciousness. There's various ways of framing what this is, but it's only one thing. And it's not a composite. It's not made up of pieces or different qualities that are somehow, aspects of it are joined to each other to make up this whole that is here. It is absolutely homogeneous with itself. It's absolutely one with itself completely. It doesn't have parts and pieces. Now, one of the interesting aspects of what is here is it's non-hierarchical. Now, this this may seem to go a little bit against the way the conversations that happen here frequently go, but it's an important point to understand. There's no superficial aspects of this, or there's no more superficial aspects of this. There's no more primary aspects of this. It's everything is absolutely fully it. There's no, there's no hierarchy of, this is less it, but this is the real rich stuff. Now, in terms of yoga, it's often useful to talk about noticing the richness of what is here beyond what is usually noticed. But this is not a hierarchy of what radiant presence is. It's a hierarchy of the field of attention. So the challenge in yoga is we come to it with a partialized attention, or the attention fixates on, portions of it and de-emphasizes other portions, which gives a very imbalanced sense, imbalanced experience of what it actually is, of its nature. So in practical terms, in discussing yoga, the conversation frequently goes into noticing beyond the normal, noticing beyond what the conscious mind interprets and all these sorts of things. But it's important to understand that there's no hierarchy here. Conscious interpretations are absolutely full-on, fundamental, radical radiant presence, just like, the most extreme, far out, I don't know what it is. So there's no hierarchy. If you look at what anything seems to be experientially, look at what it actually is, you will discover all the qualities of radiant presence. Its unresolvability, its infinity, the fact that it is infinitely more than it seems to be at first at first contact and so on. You know, you can look at thought. What is thought? I might say, oh, it's just thought, you know, conscious thought. But what is thought? What's it made of? Where does it come from? You know, what is it? If you look at thought, it's absolutely dizzying. It's an incredible, inconceivable phenomenon. If you look at light, it's the same thing. What is light? You know, where is light shining from? How does light shine? What is it? What's its texture? What is its nature? You know, what's its quality? In all aspects of experience whatsoever, if you look at what's actually present experientially, you will be dumbfounded. You'll discover that what this actually is inconceivable, essentially miraculous, or actually literally miraculous. So this is an interesting aspect of radiant presence, that it is non-hierarchical. It's entirely one thing, and there are no portions of it that are, you know, less rich or less full or less infinite than any other portions of it. Today I'd like to talk about identification. We use this idea very commonly in terms of what we identify ourselves as being. And more fundamentally, it also applies to what we identify anything as being. First, what we identify ourselves as being is perhaps the most predominant and obvious aspect of this, but in fact, that's just a particular case of identifying what anything is. Now, the interesting thing about identification is that reality is more than it is being identified as being. So whenever you identify yourself as being, you're actually more than that. When you identify some object as being something, it's actually more than that. This is always the case, because identification depends upon finding the limits of something. If you identify something as being something, it has to be what it is, and then at a certain point be no more than that, or else it becomes diluted in its own nature to the point where you can't tell what it is, which of course is interestingly ultimately the condition of radiance itself. The experience is intrinsically unidentified. The field of radiant presence is not anything in particular. It's literally infinite. It's an infinity of qualities, of richness. And in fact, nothing whatsoever than that is present. And yet, there is present within this a very powerful functional intelligence that is capable of and spontaneously generates these identifications of partializing and interpreting and averaging what aspects of the radiance are held to be, and then this identification becomes a sort of a shorthand way of relating to those aspects, those vortices within the radiance. We're all very familiar with this, of course. You know what you think you are, you know what you think your situation is, you know what you think the objects around you are, you know what you think is going on to whatever degree in terms of your interrelationships with things and people and so on. And all of that is a kind of an averaged oversimplification of what's actually happening. The field of radiance itself, which due to its very nature is infinite in every degree, and so therefore is beyond interpretability. It cannot be resolved into being a particular way, into being this way or that way. That's not to say that the superficial qualities that the interpretations orient to are not present and are not relevant and useful. Obviously they are, but from the point of view of yoga, from the point of view of seeing what this is, seeing what you are, it's essential to see the actual way that interpretation works as a simplification of something that is utterly beyond that. And this is always true. Now, particularly in terms of, for yoga's sake, in terms of your identification of yourself, your self-image, your idea of what am I? You know, we have the consensus reality starting point of, oh, I'm Peter Brown, I'm this body, I'm this personality, I'm this history, I'm this set of psychological, orientations or parameters or, responsivenesses and all these various things. That's sort of the consensus reality version of the human being that I am. But I am vastly more than that. And ultimately, if I look at what this human being is, I find the presentation of unresolvable qualities in experience. And if I pursue what these qualities are, they open out into everything. They open out into the field of being. So it's very much like if I look at Hawaii and I follow it down, it opens out into the seabed, which opens out into the whole earth. So if I look at Hawaii, I'm actually looking at the whole earth. Likewise, if I look at, my body, my personality, my history, any of these things, that's sort of the tip of the iceberg. And if I follow what's really there experientially down, it goes out into everything and is one with everything. So these partializations that identification does are not the actual condition. Now, it's important to understand there's nothing wrong with these identifications. It's not that identification is bad and we shouldn't be doing it. On the contrary, it's very useful as the normal human mode of functioning in this particular era or whatever have you. And that's all well and good. The point is not to stop identifying. The point is to see what identification really is and see that identification creates useful fictions of what things are, but things themselves are vastly and utterly beyond what they're held to be in these fictions of interpretation. And again, in terms of yoga, from the consensus reality point of view, we have a long habit of orienting to ourselves and our world in terms of these interpretations, which creates a kind of a feeling tone, a kind of implication, a sea of implication. It sort of feels like, well, I am Peter Brown, I am this body, I am my circumstances, I am my history, with all of the mood and the baggage and the flavor, the sort of dramatic value that comes with that. But which is ultimately limiting. It's ultimately problematic. It presents all sorts of difficulties. For example, I'm getting old and I'm not going to live forever. Well, that's an interesting issue. My health isn't as good as it once was. Well, that's an interesting issue. I have various challenges, in my social situation. Well, that's an interesting issue. So the implications of these interpretations present as problems, present as challenges that can weigh on one if you believe in the version, the scenario that the implications paint. That can be kind of a weight, that can be kind of a drag, a sense of limitation, a sense of frustration, a sense of stuckness and smallness. Whereas, if I look at what I really am, and I discover the truth that I am the infinite field of being, I am the infinite field of radiant presence, which is literally, physically true right here, right now, the implication is vastly different. The implication is I am beyond space and time. I am one with everything. I am eternal. I am, rich with flavors, fullness, lusciousness, with no downside whatsoever, with no problems whatsoever, and so on. It's kind of hard to state in human concepts the implications of radiant presence because they're infinite. And of course, all of our concepts are tailored to discussing finitenesses. So this is subjectively, this is one of the primary values of yoga, is coming to free yourself from the difficult implications of what you're used to identifying yourself and your situation as being. And on the contrary, when you see what you really are, you get to enjoy the implications of what that actually happens to be, which, as I say, is an astounding richness, lusciousness, fullness, freedom, spontaneity, intelligence, meaningfulness, profundity, so on and so on and so on and so on and so on forever. This that is here is the totality of reality. It already is completely what it is. It always has been and it always will be. It does not matter what happens. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what you don't do. In yoga, we take advantage of the fact that it is possible to come to see what this is, to come to recognize what this is, which gives one the ability to appreciate and enjoy the astounding quality that this has. But that doesn't change a thing. It still is what it is. You still are what you are, regardless of what seems to happen or what doesn't seem to happen. Yoga is really just a way of cheating, in a sense. It's a way of going to the end of the book and seeing all the answers. It doesn't change the book at all. The book's still just sitting here. So it's all a matter of seeing. It's not a matter of doing. It doesn't matter what you do, what you don't do. You don't need to achieve anything. You don't need to stop anything. You don't need to reject anything. Simply notice what this is. And the major factor that inhibits noticing what this is that we already think we know what it is and we're completely and utterly wrong. So the trick is to look at your experience, look at what is present here, and notice what it is without preconceptions, without the idea of what you're used to thinking that it is. Just let yourself notice this and let it show you what it is. Let it show you what it actually is and what you actually are. There's only one thing here. This that is here is all that exists. You are this. The world is this. The universe is this. There's only one presence, one being. That is you. That is what you are. That is what your experiential field is. The field of your experience is the totality of reality, which is convenient because it's right here. You can study it, you can investigate it, you can check it out. And doing so may enable you to come to recognize and appreciate its astounding qualities. The fact that it is completely other than what you're used to thinking of it as being. What is here, what this is God. It's the absolute. It's the totality of reality. It's the supreme. This is absolute completeness, absolute fullness, nothing lacking, nothing missing, nothing needing to be done, no incompleteness that needs to be developed, nothing in any way that is anything less than absolute, ultimate finality, ultimate perfection, ultimate completeness. This is what this is. This is what you are. This is the only thing that exists, this absolute fullness and completeness. It's that simple. Coming to see with self-verifying absolute certainty the way that this is so is the spiritual path, is yoga. What keeps us from seeing it is our distraction with all the seeming events and our identification with all of the complexities and interactions and seeming incompletenesses that seem to be occurring within the field of our experience. The completeness, the fullness, is more subtle. It's completely obvious as well, but it's more constant, so it's less obvious to attention. The attention goes to where there's motion. You see a sudden movement out of the corner of your eye, you shake your head and look over there, right? Whereas the fullness is just always right here. The fullness is what we might call being. Being is always complete. It's always right here. Being is never partial. It's never like, well, it's mostly being, but there's a little bit missing that needs to be filled in. Being is full. It's absolute fullness. It's absolute completeness. It's absolute inclusion, with no variation, with no fluctuation, with no no deviation whatsoever. It's absolute stability in itself, and it's in the inclusion of its own fullness, of its own wholeness. And this is what you are. The simplest way to experience this, to notice this perhaps, simply feel the being that is. This is, you are this, you have existence, you have being. The being that you have is the only being that exists. The being that you have is the being of the room you're in. It's the same being as the being of the world you're in. It's the being of the galaxies in the night sky. There's just this one being that is here. And if you look, there's no separate being that is your being and then some other being that's the universe's being. There's just this one fullness of being that's right here. It's completely obvious, completely explicit. But we typically don't spend a lot of time noticing it because it's kind of boring. It's much more interesting to keep track of the internet news and get all worked up about who's wearing masks or whatever. But all of that is little tiny flutterings and fluctuations within this absolute fullness and solidity of being that is always right here, right now, always invariably complete. And feel this completeness and feel that it is you, it is your completeness, it is your being, it is your wholeness, it is your fullness. And it's not dependent upon anything. It's absolutely transcendental. It doesn't grow out, it doesn't an outgrowth of your body. It doesn't depend on you being healthy. It doesn't depend on you even being alive. It doesn't depend on you being born. All there is this fullness of being that is right here, right now. And it's eternal. It exists beyond space and time. Space and time seems to appear within it, perhaps, but it itself is independent of space and time. And this is what you are. This is what you have always been and always will be. And letting yourself become familiar with it, letting yourself feel it and notice it and experiencing it fully and directly will enable you to become more and more aware of this, to turn into your own transcendental nature, your own fullness and completeness, your own divinity. You are God. This is God. This is the absolute. That's the simple fact. Nothing else exists. It's that simple. All of this, all the detail is simply that. It's simply what that happens to look like.